Ansible can interact with the system, but it can also interact with the remote file system on all of the computers. Now, some of the modules behave in subtly different ways. So we're going to look at the raw module, command module, and shell module because they handle the remote systems differently. I also want to talk specifically about files with the file module and the copy module, and you should get a feel for the sorts of things you can do in ad hoc mode right from the command line on a whole bunch of computers. Regardless of how many of those remote penguins you might be trying to control, you can do it with one swift command on the command line. Now, we've talked about the command module before because that's the module that is used by Ansible in ad hoc mode if you don't specify any module at all. That's the default module that it uses. The other modules we're going to talk about are horses of a different color, if you will. Now, they are different than the command module, but very subtly so. Kind of more subtle than the changes in our horse friend here on the left. But the command module is the default, and it's the one that I recommend you use. It does not use the bash or the sh shell. Now, what that means is it directly runs the commands that you send it. It doesn't log in and use the shell first. It actually directly runs those commands. Now, the advantage there is that you don't get messed up by any system shell settings that might be in place, like with the bash rc file. They don't affect you because you're not using a shell. One of the downsides is you can't use things like pipes or redirects because you're not logged into that shell that provides you with those features. If you need to do something like that, there's another module called shell, oddly enough, and shell does support pipes and redirects. So if you need to do something like that, that's the module you want to use, but you need to know that it can get messed up by the user settings, and not even just the individual user you're logging in as, but remember, on a Linux system, the etc. bash rc file is going to affect the entire system and all the users. So this could be a system-wide mess up that you don't want to have to deal with if you don't have to. So we want to use command if we can. And lastly, if you don't have Python installed, you can use the raw module, which just directly sends the commands over SSH, and it's executed on whatever you log into when you get over to that computer. Now, the advantage, obviously, is that it doesn't need Python. The disadvantage is that there's no automation or protection or abstraction of what's being sent. Whatever you send, it's going to absolutely execute because it's just sending over raw commands. So if you want to think about like the safer way to go, the further up the line you go here, command is the safest way to go because it doesn't interact with the shell at all. However, you lose the advantages of using pipes and redirects. The shell will give you that redirects, but it can be affected by the bash rc and those script settings or the shell settings on the remote computer. And if you have a computer that's say like a router or something that there's no way you can install Python, well, you can still use the raw module to actually do commands on that remote system. So all three of these have their place, but if you can use one higher on the list, that's what you want to do. So let's take a quick look at how some of those modules work. First, let's look at a shortcoming of the command module. So let's say that we do Ansible. Let's just do the GUI group for no reason other than we can show that we can use a group. So Ansible GUI, I'm going to say -b for become, and I want to say -m command, which I wouldn't have to do. Remember, that's the default module, but I want to specify it just so we know exactly what we're doing. And the action I want to take is echo hello, and I want to redirect it into root hello.txt. All right, so if we press enter, it says we had success on Ubuntu and CentOS, okay? However, the command module, remember, is not supposed to be able to support redirection. So let's see what actually happened. If we go over to Ubuntu, you'll see I'm actually in the root directory here. If I type ls, oh, there's nothing here. Okay, so it just echoed that entire string. It didn't do a redirect. So what we see over here in the success is it actually echoed hello greater than /root /hello.txt. And that's not what we wanted. I wanted to actually redirect it into a file. So we could use a different module that will accomplish that. We could say Ansible GUI-b-m shell and then -a echo hello into root hello.txt. Press enter. we should get success, and there's no output here because what did it do? It actually echoed and redirected into that file. So it succeeded, and if we look over here now, you'll notice I'm logged in as root. I didn't mention that, I think, but I logged in as root here so that we could look in this directory. So our present working directory is the root directory. If we type ls, haha, look at that, hello.txt. What's in there? Just the word hello. So we've actually used the shell module to copy files over, or to actually create a file that was created with a redirect, something that's not possible by default with the command module. All right. Now the raw module would do the exact same thing. So let's just push the up arrow. Instead of shell, I'm going to say raw, and I'm going to echo hello underscore again, and I'm going to do just a single redirect. Actually, here, let's do a double. So this should add it to the end of the file on both of them. So we should have hello.txt that has hello, and then the line under it should say hello again if it's actually redirecting and adding on to the end of the file. So let's press enter. And it said the shared connection to Ubuntu is closed, the connection to CentOS is closed, but there was no other output. Now it showed us this because remember, it just gives us exactly what that SSH session replied. It logged in, it did this echo command, and then it closed the connection, and the response we got from the system was connection closed. So the raw module really did just do a raw SSH connection over, and it executed that, and then it logged out. So let's see if it actually had that effect. Let's cat hello.txt, and look at that. Hello and hello again was added on to the end. So raw does support redirects, but only because the system that we're logging into supports redirects, right? We're just raw command or sending raw commands over. So that's how it works. And ideally, we would use the shell command in this. We wouldn't use raw unless we absolutely had to in a case where Python or something like that was not installed. So if Python's not installed, you have to use raw, but you're really limited because it's about the only module that you can use. There's a couple, but raw is the main one you can use if Python is not installed. So that's how we can, see the actual difference between command, shell, and raw in action. But I do want to show you some more file operations. Let's clear the screen really quickly. And let's quickly look at Ansible GUI. We're going to use the same computers again. -B for become root. This time I'm going to use the file module. All right, and the action that I want to do, I'm going to put it in single quotes, is for the path of root hello.txt state equals absent. Now that should look a little bit familiar. When we were messing with packages using the apt or yum module, the state equals absent would be a way to remove a package. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're saying, or this file, we want the state of that file to be absent. So if we press enter, we should actually get a response that it changed, true, that was the path, and now the state is absent. If we do it again, we should get a similar response, except that it should be green, no change was made because it wasn't there in the first place. And we can check by coming over here and typing ls, and sure enough, our file is gone. Now, we don't have to use the command or the script module, or I'm sorry, the command or the shell module to create files using echo. We can also directly send files, which is a really useful thing to do. For example, if I look, let me clear the screen again. If we look at the etc. hosts file on this computer, we're going to see that we set these up in an earlier nugget so that these would resolve. So repo, CentOS, and Ubuntu resolve to these IP addresses. However, if we go over here and we look at the etc. hosts file, you see we don't have those settings in there because we just didn't put them in place. They're not there. Same thing with CentOS here, where I'm also root. If we look at etc. hosts, all we have is the 127001. All right, so that is an issue, and it's one that we can solve using the copy module. So we could say Ansible, we're just going to say GUI again, we'll just use those two, -B for become because it's a file that we're going to need root access to manage. The module is going to be the copy module. And here the action, -A, that we want is the source equals etc. hosts, and the destination equals etc. hosts. And what this should do is copy from the source on this computer, the etc. hosts file. It should copy it to the destination on those computers of the etc. host file and overwrite it. It said there was a success, here's the checksum, it copied it over, and if we go over to, for example, Ubuntu 16.04, and we were to say cat the etc. hosts file now, we should see, sure enough, we have those files. Now there is an issue. If we go over to CentOS, we're going to see that, same thing. We have that Ubuntu 16. But here's the issue that I want to talk about. If you look on CentOS here, it says that 127.0.1.1 resolves to Ubuntu 16 because this entry is going to be unique to every computer. And that is one of the big issues with using Ansible in ad hoc mode. We can't do things like elaborate template systems where we use different variables that we can pull from the system. So that's where I want to take the opportunity to say, while Ansible in ad hoc mode can do amazing things and it's very, very powerful, it has limitations. If we want to do more elaborate things like do actions based on facts about the computer, like if it's Ubuntu versus CentOS, maybe we use different modules, like instead of using yum and letting Ubuntu fail or using apt and letting CentOS fail, if we could pull information from these two systems to find out what they are and then craft actions based on those facts about those computers, Ansible is going to be a lot more effective. And that's where playbooks come into play. However, for this nugget, I really want you to understand how powerful it can be using the various ad hoc tools for administering the system, managing files remotely. And if you want to look at the Ansible documentation again, you can. There are even more things. We could change the file permissions or the file owners using different flags in here. So it is a very powerful way to manipulate computers, but it does have limitations. The whole raw versus command versus shell module issue can be a little confusing, but hopefully it makes sense and you get why you would want to use one over the other. Sometimes you have to use one over the other because you don't have an option if Python's not installed. And also these file and copy modules, you can do amazing things in ad hoc mode just using those particular things. Copying files to 1,000 different computers is a simple one-liner. Ad hoc mode is very powerful, even with its limitations that we kind of talked about at the end of this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.